This is episode 95 of the Tech Takeout from Grantwood AEA. My name is Jonathan Wylie, and I'm joined by two of my favourite people today. First up, Mindy Carney.
Hello. Hello.
And we also have Lynn Kleinmeyer.
Hi, friends.
We are back after our summer hiatus.
Yes, here we are.
And it is pouring down with rain outside.
Oh my gosh. And it's busy here today. I was like, I'll just pull right up by the door. And I'm like, no, everybody is here. I had to get my umbrella out of the back. I was like, what's the point?
But we're going to bring the sunshine on this episode.
Right. And you got your run in for today. So, I mean, like, we're winning. Yeah, it's Friday.
Well, let's jump right in then with news and follow-up. We'll get back to that Lynn Kleinmeyer later. But feel free to join in here, Lynn. Flipgrid live events is the first thing I put down here, which I thought was kind of interesting. You can now take your learners on an adventure with Flipgrid live events without ever leaving the comfort of your classroom, home, or wherever you learn, because they have virtual field trips with authors, scientists, humanitarians, and creators that are sharing their passions from all over the world. So this reminds me a little bit of what Microsoft did with the Skype virtual field trips. And so, obviously, Microsoft are in with owning Flipgrid now, so making those connections, I think that's a great little addition to have on there.
I did not see this come through ever.
This one I saw on Twitter over the summer, and I just filed it away.
Sure you did, yeah.
I know who would appreciate this. The Tech Takeout listeners.
For sure.
Yeah. They've got a little schedule on there, so like they just had one September 1. It was a back-to-school night with Zookeeper Will. They've got Mindfulness one on September 8th. September 15th is International Dot Day with Peter Reynolds. Lynn will appreciate that one.
So I was scrolling through and I saw it and I'm like, okay, I might register here. Just sit by myself and, go on this virtual experience. But it's kind of cool. There's some that you can watch on demand. So looks like if you miss the live event, you can go back. So that's kind of cool.
Next up, I have a link here that has got, I don't think this is the greatest title I've ever put down on the dog, but it's called...
But it's alliteration.
It's called Spreading Screencastify, and I don't really know what that looks like, but this was a link I also saw tweeted out if you are a coach or you are some kind of technology trainer and you want to show other people the power and things that Screencastify can do. This is a good one-stop place where you can go and get resources and ideas for that. So they have things like slide decks on how to create video. They've got webinars. They've got certifications you can do here, different courses you can take to be a certified Screencastify person. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page...
Oh, here it is.
Request swag. Get some Screencastify swag to accompany your amazing Screencastify presentation. Just let us know where to send it. So we should request some swag.
So have you already requested?
So what is the swag? I'm going to click on it here. I'm sure it's it's a form. It doesn't tell you what the swag is.
You need to know before you sign up for all the swag.
It's probably stickers would be my guess.
Could be.
We used to have a bunch of stickers. I think I threw them all away.
Laptop stickers, yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go. If you are interested in spreading this Screencastify word, then that is how you do that. Next link I saw on there, I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but I was just talking to our support staff recently about Chrome's tab groups.
Yeah.
And the first thing they asked me is, what happens if I close Chrome? What happens to my tab groups? And I said, they will go away.
Yeah.
However, it looks like in the beta versions of Chrome, there is a new feature coming that has a toggle there that says Save Group. And if you toggle that over, it will sync with your other Chrome instances and also, save your tab groups so that you can close Chrome and then reopen it and get your tab groups back. So not here yet, but it's in the early beta versions of Chrome's next versions.
Nice.
Either of you use tab groups?
I have used tab groups. I don't find them as I know some people really like their tab groups, but I don't find them to be as super efficient as I need them to be. So I also use my tabs as a to-do list of sorts. So I really enjoy the closing of all the tabs. I don't know. I also keep things into separate windows.
I do too. And I mean, confession time, I don't use it for that same reason. Just because there's something super satisfying about closing a whole window.
I love it.
But I kind of feel like a lot of my workflow, I have to keep all of these projects, like it has to be visible to me at all times.
Right.
So it's that whole out of sight, out of mind mentality. And I know it's kind of silly because the tabs are right there at the top and you can see them. But yeah, I like to have all the things open at all the times.
What about you, Wylie? You seem like you'd be a tab grouper.
I'm not a tab grouper.
You're not?
Because I don't work with like more than like 7 or 8 tabs at a time
A lot to
before
do
I
that.
close stuff down. But I have a tab window tip for you that I was just also talking to our sports staff about yesterday, because you guys are multiple window people and I'm not really. I mean, I have like a work window and like a personal window if I want to go and check something at lunch or something.
You do.
Yeah. If you right-click somewhere to the right of your tabs, you will see the option to name a window. And so if you have multiple windows, you can name one. So if you have a project you're working on, like some stuff for the podcast, you could name one window podcast, and you can name another window blended learning, and you can name another window PD for Lisbon or whatever you're working on. And then when you are switching between your windows, if you either on the taskbar at the top on Mac where you can select window and go down, it will tell you the name of the window that you are working in.
Well, it tells you the name of one of the tabs in your window right
Which
now.
is a clue.
So, but you have to kind of, sometimes I look at it and I'm like, oh, geez, it says mail. Mail is not that's not going to help me at all. So that makes sense, huh?
A little bonus tech nugget, I just throw that one in there for you.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Thanks for helping us.
Well, here's the big summer news that maybe we should have a little bit of a conversation about.
Okay.
And this was a blog post that actually came out in June that I think we all ignored or didn't see or were on vacation or something. But safer learning with Google for education. Google says we're launching a new age-based access system to make it easier for admins to tailor experiences for their users based on age when using Google services like YouTube, Photos, and Maps. All admins in primary and secondary institutions must indicate which of their users, such as teachers and staff, are 18 and older and which ones are not, because they are changing what those users can do with those products. So, for instance, in YouTube, if you are under 18, you are no longer able to post videos, upload videos, comment, or live stream using a Google account your school has issued.
Right. That made me think, like, I manage my kids' Gmail accounts through me. So I'm a parent. I didn't even look ever in their email accounts to see, like, if it said anything to them, because they post videos all the time.
Well, that's just it, because as far as I know, if you have a Gmail account, you can be 13 or over, and then you can do whatever you want. Okay. But Google has decided in their wisdom that if you are under 18... you cannot do that inside of YouTube, and you get limited on Maps and Photos as well. And those are 3 apps that are kind of outside of that Google Workspace for Education thing, but they're still apps that
people
educators use. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
So, I don't know what the rationale really there is. Making it easier for admins to tailor experiences for their users?
Maybe.
Whatever you say, Google, whatever you say.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward.
I know.
There's some ramifications that were unforeseen.
Be curious if we have any school districts that are like, we totally missed this boat, and now we didn't mark teachers, and I mean,
and I think
it's
kind
go
of
time now.
Timing-wise, it's like right at the beginning of the school year, Google.
Right? You couldn't have waited till October.
Yeah.
Also says in Chrome, Safe Search and Safe Sites will be on by default.
Which is great.
And Guest Mode and Incognito Mode will be off by default.
Oh, wow, because we're tracking you.
Admins do still have the ability to change those policies on an individual basis. So, it's good to have that Safe Search on.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right, Lynn added something on here too, so we'll just let Lynn talk about this.
I feel like they're lackluster after all of that. It's like,
It's another Google update, so it makes sense to talk about it now.
Well, the next 2 are Google updates, but the first one is that there is going to be rollout and update coming where you can better understand how you're spending your time via your Google Calendar. And so it's a time
Don't judge
insight.
me, Google. Don't judge me
No,
with
but here's the thing. Like, I get super nerdy about stuff like this just because the last time I was on the podcast, we were talking about our workflows and productivity. And so I do get kind of interested and excited. Yes, I know it's super nerdy, but just looking at like, okay, so how am I spending my time and how could I be more efficient? And supposedly you're supposed to have like a time breakdown based on your working hours and the types of meetings, your time in meetings, and the people you meet with most. So I don't know. Could be interesting. Here's the caveat, the womp womp, sad trombone, is that it is rolling out, but it's only available to the Google Workspace Business Standard, Business Plus, Enterprise Standard, Enterprise Plus, Education Plus, and nonprofit customers.
So basically
no one. But I'm saying this out loud and putting it out in the Google sphere that, okay, that would be kind of cool to look at. Like and honestly, let's be super transparent. I'm not sure the audience that would use it most. I think it would be really cool for us as consultants, or I think about like instructional coaches and things like that. Your everyday classroom teacher, probably not. They probably know where their time is spent. Right. So I thought it was worth a mention. And so somebody who has access to that, please contact us and let us know how that works. But the other one I had to share because it's going to revolutionize education, communication,
Stop the bus.
Connections.
What is it?
We are now going to have the ability within Google Chats to find and share GIFs right in that Google chat. Which, let's be honest, okay, I am kind of thankful for that because my second language is GIF use, and so just to be able to have it right there, I think that's kind of fun. So, had to mention that one too.
Is that a bot then or not?
You ask good questions.
I don't think so.
No, okay. No.
It says admins can enable or disable this GIF integration in the admin console by turning it on or off.
Yeah, and good news. It's going to be available to those of us who are not.
To all the mere mortals around the world.
Peons. And so that's kind of rolling out over the course of the next couple weeks.
Nice.
I'm wondering if it's going to be off by default because it says when enabled by your admin, you can find and insert GIFs.
Right.
So we should turn that on for Grantwood people.
We 100% should.
That is the first thing I'm doing after the podcast.
Yes. All right. See, this is why I dropped that in, because now we needed that in our day. So thank you, Jonathan.
And finally, I put this one in just for Mindy because I know how much she loves
I hate this stuff. I'm looking at it. Go ahead.
I know how much she loves these .new shortcuts that I keep surfacing for her. This is the Google Registry for all the .new shortcuts that are in existence for every
What is this stuff?
I don't know.
Ever.
Like, I'll be honest, I looked through some of it. I'm like,
I don't even know what these things are. Wow, I'm missing out on the Google world because...
So if you click over in the sidebar where it says education, you'll see some more familiar things.
Okay.
So you can do things like citation.new to add a bibliography citation with BibGuru. You can do code.new, you can do course.new, kahoot.new, and quiz.new will give you a new Kahoot quiz. Quizlet.new. So there's a whole... Every possible .new extension that is in the Google Registry is here in one place if you want to have a look at these. You can click productivity and see all the Google ones and Canva ones and
Fundraiser.new? Design custom products to sell online with Bonfire? I don't even understand. Pizza.new, I'm in.
Yeah?
Yes.
You remember that?
Order your
100%.
Domino's pizza online.
There you go.
Thank you for that. Okay, fine.
So there you go. All the .new ones that you could possibly want. I think that came via Tony Vincent on Twitter. So I give a shout
Drink
out
recipes. Drink.new.
Drink.new?
Yeah, drink.new.
There's some interesting ones in here,
I don't
friends. You should
understand
definitely
why.
scroll through this because
Why is this a thing?
yeah, there are some interesting ones.
It's Friday Fun Day.
Yeah, okay.
There you go. Let's
All right.
call it that. Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on because I know we have two amazing guests to talk to next.
Here we go. Okay. So up next, served to you piping hot, our main course today is talking about universal design for learning with our guests, Lynn Kleinmeyer and Jonathan Wylie.
Hi, Mindy.
Oh, we're so excited that you
Step into my
have us
office,
here.
guys. Step into my office.
Can I just say before we start that I am a really big fan of this podcast.
My gosh, this is too much.
I feel like I have listened to every single episode at least
30
once.
times.
At least 5
Which
times.
is more than me, so that's good.
Every episode. So to be here today is a great
It's a
honor.
huge honor.
Well,
It
thanks
is.
for joining me. I'm so glad you're both here.
Thanks, Mindy.
So we're talking a little bit about Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. Can you start us off by maybe giving us kind of an idea, an overview of what exactly UDL is?
Well, I think Universal Design for Learning had its origins with Universal Design, which is more of an architectural or design kind of concept that was really popular or started to get legs in the 50s, where, you know, we have things like curb cuts for people in wheelchairs to get down and cross roads, or we have like ramps in front of buildings for people with wheelchairs to access those things. But over time, we discovered, completely by accident probably, that these accommodations that we were making for a specific group of people actually had wider implications and were useful for everybody. So parents with strollers can use these sorts of things. Elderly people who might not want to climb up a whole bunch of stairs could take advantage of a ramp. Or, you know, the UPS guy or the Pepsi delivery guy can get things in and out of buildings quicker and easier without dropping all their goods. So there's all sorts of different ways that, you know, this has become embedded in our society, and you can see that stuff everywhere. So that's when CAST thought about it from a learning point of view and used a different lens to think about what Universal Design for Learning would be.
Right. So these brilliant people at CAST originally thought about, okay, how could this idea of universal design with architecture be applied to learning environments? Specifically thinking about, okay, how can we remove barriers for students maybe who have identified needs in order to give them access to the learning content. So they started to craft what are called the UDL Guidelines. And so if you look at the UDL guidelines, which I'm sure Jonathan will link in the notes, so if you're kind of following along visually, the guidelines themselves are broken into 3 columns. So you have the first column, which is engagement. It's really the why of learning. This is really important of how do you invite your students into the learning process, and how do you help them see the relevance and feel honored from the get-go. And they intentionally put that column first because it's kind of important. If you don't have your students feeling that ownership from the beginning and feeling seen and honored, then you kind of lose all the rest. But then as you kind of progress through, there's the representation column, which is the what of learning. It's how are you sharing the content and giving scaffolds and supports to students so that they really can interact with your content or your information in a meaningful way. And then the final column is action and expression. It's the how of learning. How are you scaffolding and supporting your students to be able to show what they learn or what they understand? And ultimately, the whole goal of all of this is to create expert learners. And if you look across the bottom of the guidelines, you've got this idea of them being purposeful and motivated and resourceful and knowledgeable and strategic and goal-directed. And so those are the things that all of education is really about. And so the UDL guidelines are taking that mentality of universal design of what are those things that we can do that might help, you know, specific students, but really are going to have ramifications and implications and benefits for lots of students. So it's about being intentional from the get-go and mindful of who your students are, as opposed to being retroactive and trying to retrofit things.
Yeah, and we talked to one of our school consultants recently, yesterday, who was asking that same question, you know, what is UDL? And as she was looking through it, she was like, wait, this is just like good teaching, isn't it? And we're like, yeah, this is just the type of things you do if you are using best practices in the classroom. It's about giving students more choice. It's about, you know, making your content more relevant for students. It's about giving them multiple ways to show what they know. These are all things that we talk about, but they're just nicely packaged up in these guidelines here.
Right. And like I said before, you know, the UDL guidelines, it's not something you do. It's a mindset. It's about being intentional and being thoughtful about that learning environment and the learning experiences that you're creating with your students in mind.
So if you haven't looked at the UDL guidelines before, I really urge you to look at the show notes, because I think one of the great aspects of the UDL guidelines is just that there are, I wouldn't say specific examples, but it gives you it helps really clarify, I think, between the what and the how, and the why, the what, and the how. Because sometimes it gets a little cloudy if you just hear someone talking about it. But if you look through it and really start thinking about it, you're probably going to be able to pull examples of things that you've done for specific kids that might make you think, oh, you know what? That kind of makes sense. Like, why wouldn't I try that for all of my students?
Exactly.
So if you haven't looked at it, I urge you to take a look at our show notes and really just take some time to look over that, because I think it's a really beneficial tool. So it sounds like you guys have done a lot of talking. How did you guys get so interested in this, or how did this all come to the table together?
That's kind of an interesting question. When I think about the foundations, the beliefs behind the UDL guidelines, I think as a teacher, this was always something that I felt very strongly about. I think about, I started off my career as a 7th grade reading teacher, and the students I was working with in my school district, it constantly amazed me. They came to school with lived experiences that were so vastly different from my own, and I just was constantly aware that my thinking or my way of learning maybe sometimes unintentionally was causing barriers. And so I really wanted to kind of think differently about the learning experiences that I was crafting. And as a reading teacher, it broke my heart because so many of my students would come to me and not identify as readers. And when I really started digging into why, it was because they, somewhere along the way, because they maybe struggled with something, or because they didn't have the voice and choice over what they were reading, they didn't define themselves as readers. And so I really wanted to work proactively to invite them into the learning process and change things and really, really think differently about what I was asking them to do and why I was asking them to do it the way that I was. And so it just really kind of started this passion for me of, we, for example, need to redefine literacy. This is my little bit of a soapbox, but this idea of students who maybe were struggling with reading, I taught the outsiders. And just because they couldn't decode it for themselves didn't mean they shouldn't have that learning experience. And so as a reading teacher, I removed it. I would read out loud to my kids, or I would get them the audiobooks because I wanted them to have that experience. And I think that started to kind of shape who I was as a teacher. But it wasn't until I think I came to the agency and first started hearing about and learning about UDL, it wasn't until that moment that I really had any sort of anything to ground the conversation and ground my thinking and help me really reflect on my practices. And so I think it was probably when I came to the agency that I first kind of started learning about UDL, and I just kind of took off from there because I think it so deeply connected to my values and my belief systems as far as education and needing to kind of shift practices or just be super reflective about the practices.
Yeah, and I think from my side of the table here, I guess people that know me won't know that there's probably two distinct sides to my brain, or the way my brain works. And one is an education side, but the other is like a technology side. And I'm a big kind of technology geeky person. So
no,
that's
really,
right.
We didn't know that.
So I'm always fascinated by all the new features, all the new hardware, all the new stuff that all the technology companies come out with, and some of the biggest things that they do, or some of the best things that they do, some of the most innovative things they do, I think, have always been accessibility type things, and how they can make their devices more accessible to other people. And I've always looked at that stuff and thought, that's amazing, but I don't, in my education job, I don't see all that many people using that in a gen ed classroom. And I think, well, why not? Why aren't people using that? And what can we do to get more people taking advantage of voice typing in Google Docs, because nobody's really using it, because people think, well, that's for people of a specific group that need that, but that group might not be as specific as you think it might be. And that led me down to thinking about, how can we get more of that into general practice, and what does that look like, and why is it not in general practice? And as I followed that path, I ended up having more conversations with one of our ex-colleagues, Julie Freed, and we used to share some of these fun technology things back and forward with each other. And she'd say, hey, you can use this in a gen ed classroom. And I'm like, yeah, we absolutely could. And I would say, hey, have you seen this? And she's like, no, this is great. And so that led me towards UDL, as well as it was the technology that led me to UDL, because that is a pretty big part of it in terms of providing access for students. So this is something that Lynn and I have been talking about for a long time. And we were having these conversations and ready to go live with a whole bunch of different projects. And then COVID hit. And then we just thought, okay, let's keep the conversations going, but save this for another time. And here we are today.
Which is interesting, because we are digital learning consultants. And we talk about this a lot as a team, is that our job has certainly morphed into kind of different things. And I know, Jonathan, you mentioned about bringing technology into play. So I guess a question I have then is, if I am, a gen ed classroom teacher, are there things that you're like, do you have 3 things that, a tool or something that they could try that is good and has been shared for 1 or 2 kids in a class, but might be really great for all of the kids in the class? So Jonathan mentioned voice typing. Are there any other things that you're like, this could be something you could try tomorrow?
I mean, there's so many pieces to this, because you think about just even the way we utilize technology for ourselves right now. For example, there are so many of our AEA online resources that have built-in accessibility features. Mm-hmm. For example, being able to have text read aloud to them. That, I'll be really honest. I mean, obviously, I was a reading teacher turned librarian, so obviously literacy is a big part of my life. There are times where I'm tired, and that the physical act of reading with my own eyeballs, I need a break. And so to be able to listen, I listen to audiobooks all the time. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those things that just because I don't have a vision impairment doesn't mean I can't benefit from listening to the book. So, I mean, even little things like that, just starting to think differently. Or, once again, because of my literacy background, the idea of sometimes I value the written word. I'm not going to lie about that. But when you have a student, and I think about, even my own child who has some struggles with fine motor skills, that if I'm asking a student to write what they're thinking, that might make me miss part of what they're understanding, or maybe unintentionally puts up a barrier. So even things like, could I have my students do an audio response or a video response? Because a lot of times we've got Chromebooks, we've got iPads, it's super easy. They've got phones, could they just real quick record themselves for my exit ticket, as opposed to maybe, actually writing that physical ticket.
Yeah, and I pick up on that because, we've got all these one-to-one classrooms now. Everybody's got a device, but all of these devices have things built into them that we're not using. It's like you would expect to get a discount if you're not using all the features or something. Take a look at all the built-in accessibility features on your Chromebooks, on your Macs, on your PCs, on your iPads, whatever it is you've got, because they've all got things like text-to-speech and speech-to-text and Zoom and other things built in there that we're not using or that we're paying for in other services and things like that. So there are ways to use that. And then, there's other tools. I mean, we talk about the immersive reader on this podcast quite a lot, which is a really great tool that's just in so many places now, and it's getting into more and more places just to get your students familiar with, what that little icon looks like, so that if you are on a site that uses that, or you're in Canvas, or you're on Wonderopolis or Flipgrid or Wakelet or whatever else, you find the immersive reader just to, have that as an option and give them permission to use that stuff, because it's there for anybody.
Well, I think you bring up a good point about giving them permission. It's not cheating to use these types of tools. And I think that is probably one of the mind shifts that need to happen, is that a lot of times I think, like even my son, he voice searches everything. He never types anything into Google. And I'm like, what is he, but I don't know for certain, but if he were to go into a classroom and started using that option, is that, would his teacher be like, that's
acceptable?
Yeah.
I did air quotes,
are you
like
cheating?
You can see me.
So I think it's really about giving permission for kids to use those tools and to find the tools that work best for them. So keep that in mind. It's not cheating. It's
absolutely.
just, kind of giving kids a step up if they need it. And like you said, sometimes it's just, I just need a break right now. Can I just listen to this instead of sitting down and reading something? So
it's mindful of your goal. If your purpose is to have them understand some sort of content, well then give them different pathways. Too, right? Yeah, and that's really what the UDL guidelines are about, is like that idea of that multiple modalities, that multiple pathways to experience things. And so it's about that intentionality and being purposeful, which I think those of you who know me, those are kind of like two of my big words. Like when you have
Lord.
Did anyone hear Mindy's eyes roll? But truly though, it's being really cognizant of what is your goal and who are your kiddos. And the other piece is that, that's going to change day to day, and that's okay too.
So our teachers are, what I would say, probably feeling still pretty stressed this year. How does this not feel like one more thing? How does it fit into what their instruction already looks like? I mean, how do we help teachers take something like this on?
I think it's one of these things that maybe goes back to what I was mentioning earlier in terms of, a lot of this is just what good teaching looks like. And so it's not about, throwing everything out and starting brand new with new stuff. You'll be able to look through the UDL guidelines and recognize a lot of the things that you are already doing. But it maybe links back to what Lynn was saying about, just having that mindset of what UDL is when you're doing some instructional planning. So do I have parts where I am looking to actively engage my kids? I'm providing choice, or I'm optimizing for relevance, or, I'm being clear with my goals and objectives. It's just look at that. Make sure I've got that in my lesson design. And then, moving on to that representation style, am I presenting content to kids that's accessible for everybody and giving them all ways to access it? And, thinking about the action and expression, it's moving on, do I give them multiple ways to show what they know? Am I giving them tools and access to be able to demonstrate their learning and use it that way? So I think if you look at it from that point of view, it's nothing new, really. It's things that you probably already do. It's just about being intentional and thinking about how you are making that part of your lesson plans.
Right. It's about being reflective. And those of you who know me, I like to ask a lot of questions. But I think that's what the UDL guidelines do, is just to help you ask some questions about for whom is this working and under what conditions, and then thinking about, okay, if there's components that aren't, why, and what could we do to kind of shift just a little bit to invite even more kids into the process and help them meet success.
So if this is of interest to our listeners, how would they go about learning more about UDL?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Mindy.
Oh, thank you. You asked such good questions, Mindy.
Thanks.
As it happens, Lynn and I have started a new podcast called Divergent by Design, where we break down the UDL guidelines into smaller chunks and give you some real actionable examples of what UDL looks like in the classroom.
Yeah. And, as part of that too, of course, the podcast is not the only place, but, we've linked in the UDL guidelines into the show notes. So that's always a great place to start. What I love about the UDL guidelines too is they're interactive. So you can click on each of the different titles, or they have what are called checkpoints, which are just, once again, those considerations that kind of delves deeper into each of those and helps you kind of be mindful. But definitely the podcast, we actually also talk a lot about books and things like that and making some connections, because the one thing I would also be remiss to not mention is just that UDL isn't just another acronym to layer in. It really does connect with a lot of the bigger conversations that are happening. Every single district that I know of is talking about MTSS, that multi-tiered systems of supports of this is kind of at that tier 1, kind of asking and considering some of those things. So, we definitely encourage you to explore this a little bit further, whether it be via the podcast or checking out the guidelines or joining us for our course.
Yeah, and if you're in the Grantwood area, Lynn and I are going to have a class running soon that you'll be able to sign up on and dive a little deeper into UDL.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on and talking a little bit about UDL, Lynn and Jonathan. You're welcome back anytime.
Oh, thanks. We're so excited.
Okay. You,
Jonathan, not so
Jonathan,
much. I get to come back whenever.
I wouldn't be anywhere else. I mean, I don't know what else I would be doing right now, so.
Really, I can think about a million things that I would be doing. All right, so up next, my favorite part of the show, it's Tech Nuggets. Want me to go first?
Sure.
You've been talking a lot. All right, so I have an oldie but a goodie instructional strategy called Turn and Talk, and I'm sure lots of you are familiar with the turn and talk. It's about kind of or an elbow partner. We call it a couple different things. I came across a reimagining of turn and talk to turn and learn, which feels a little bit more like reciprocal teaching to me. So it gives students the opportunity to turn and share their thoughts. But the main purpose of the turn and learn strategy is that you share the thoughts of your partner. You're learning from them. And then with permission from that partner, you're able to share those things out, maybe represent your partner's thoughts in a certain way. And I thought this was an interesting twist because I do see a lot of turn and talk and a lot of elbow partners. And sometimes those repetitive strategies students can kind of get bored with. So I thought this was a nice, just little, 25-degree turn on the turn and talk. But I also started to think about what tech tools I could use with this instructional strategy. And I thought, well, Flipgrid might be a way and I know we're still probably talking about students learning from home and quarantining. I feel like those conversations are starting to resurface again, but I thought this would be a nice way for students who might be at home for one reason or another, or students who are a little apprehensive about elbow partners and things like that, that a way to do this would be to create videos within Flipgrid, and you might have an assigned partner that you would listen to their reflections and then revoice some of their thoughts. Or you could choose a partner that you connected with and revoice those thoughts, or choose a partner that had totally different ideas than you and revoice or represent those ideas. So I always am trying to look for instructional strategies that I think work with digital tools, and I thought this was one that might be a possibility.
Yeah, I really like this. When you look at the outline of kind of what the kids are asked to do, I love that, once again, you've mentioned that they're sharing their partner's thoughts. Mm-hmm. And I love that they say, with their partner's permission. So we're just being good citizens there too. But I really like the idea that you just surfaced about turning to somebody who maybe doesn't have the same viewpoint as you, because then we kind of engaging in a little civil discourse.
That's right.
And we need some of that. So good find.
Yeah. So this comes from the Identity-Centered Learning, which is identitycentered.com. And there are some different ways to maybe discuss conversation with your students, and lots of resources here. This was a new to me resource in general, so might be something that you would like to take a look at if you're trying to really bring in the voices of your different students, and really help the different identities of your classroom be more visible, I guess.
Yeah, and I love that there's all of these infographics, which are great because then, that's something that you can put in front of students too. So, yeah.
Nice work, Mindy.
Thank you.
I'm going to follow that up with another reimagining of an existing concept, because I was reading through Jennifer Gonzalez's blog recently, and she has a post on HyperRubrics, which I thought was a nice twist on an existing thing. So she has a podcast interview with Tyler Rablin and Jeffrey Frieden, who are high school teachers, I believe, and they put a spin on a traditional rubric by adding hyperlinks into some of their criteria. So, for instance, they've got one here that's I can define protagonist, antagonist, conflict, and plot structure. And in the rubric, they have hyperlinked like protagonist, and in the rubric, they have hyperlinked protagonist and conflict and plot and things like that, so that the students could click on those and think, okay, so what is a protagonist? Do I actually know what that is, or do I need some help and follow up? So you could link to whatever it is you need to, whether it's a definition or a video or some kind of support concept. So I think it really helps make rubrics more impactful for students, because instead of just seeing a whole bunch of, I don't know what the education version of legalese is. I mean, that probably is what it looks like, just education jargon to kids sometimes when we put our standards and things on there. Mm-hmm. They can actually click through and see what these things mean, or maybe see an example of what it looks like to have a paragraph with a distinct supporting sentence or something like that. Mm-hmm. So HyperRubrics, I will link to that blog post and podcast episode, and you can check those out.
Nice. Kind of a UDL take on rubrics. Mm-hmm. Well played.
Could be.
All right, so my next tech nugget was from Richard Byrne, of course, and he shows how, has anybody else like added this Moat thing to their, have you guys been using Moat or trying it at
I've
all?
been using Moat in some places, yeah.
So if you're, I think we've mentioned Moat a few times here and there last season, right? I get to call it seasons now. Did you ever get over that?
We never did seasons.
Well, last season we talked a little bit about Moat because I feel like that's kind of when it first came out. Is that right? I don't know. Anyway, so Moat is an ability to add like a voice memo to different other online tools. And so Moat has been, I think I've seen Moat the most within Google tools. I'm not even sure. Can you use Moat other places? This is how much I know about Moat. I have no idea.
You ask real good questions.
I don't know.
I don't know, actually.
I don't know either. So you can use Moat to add in voice memos to like Google Slides and to Google Docs. Richard Byrne just sent out something the other day that was about adding voice to Google Forms, which I do, forms are tricky, I think, because it's a great way to gather, some formative data about your students, but it doesn't allow for a lot of accessibility. So adding voice to Google Forms allows you to add your voice to questions that you might be asking your students, but also allows students to record a voice memo into Google Forms. So allows them to have multimedia. We're able to add images. Now with Moat, you could add voice into your Google Form as well. And you might be thinking, well, how would I listen to all of those? It also, with Google Forms, pulls all of that data into a spreadsheet. So you add that into a spreadsheet, you could just listen to the link because Moat creates a voice memo link. You could just listen to those links all the way through in your spreadsheet, nice and organized. So I thought it was interesting and a nice way to, put a little bit of a twist on Google Forms.
Right. And once again, UDL for the win, because for your students, you mentioned that, if you have students who need extra scaffolding or support, that could be a great way for adding some think abouts for them. And then the fact that they can respond with their voice, with that audio versus having to type in or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you could share that spreadsheet then with students and allow them to listen to each other's responses. I mean, maybe not for a quiz or something like that, but it could be a nice way to just gather some different, voices from your students. And you could have like a mystery voice. You could have all kinds of stuff. It's just a nice way to gather those things up.
Well, real-time feedback. Moat works on web pages too. You don't just share a web link. You use Moat to leave a voice note on any website and bring your link to life. I wasn't reading that.
Right. Didn't sound like it at all.
No.
I don't know. I feel like Moat is kind of an untapped resource for me right now. I just need to sit down and mess with it a little bit and figure out what it can do. So
I just really like the idea of the fact that you get it quickly with the form.
Yeah.
Just because you think about workflow and productivity and things like that. Yeah. That's kind of a game changer.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's funny you mentioned productivity, Lynn.
Wow.
Because
Nice segue.
my last nugget here is kind of a productivity tool that I have adopted of late. So I've gone through various like note-taking type of tools over the years. I've used Google Keep, not for very long. I use OneNote. I used Evernote, and different note-taking things. And I'm a big fan of the fact that I feel like I don't take notes in Google Docs for a reason, because if I take notes in Google Docs, then it just gets lost among all my other docs and things like that. So I feel like if I want to take notes on something, it has to be in a note-taking app that's separate from my other stuff, because that way I know my notes are there.
Kind of like a notebook.
Kind of like a notebook. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and then I started to think a little bit about how I take notes. What does my brain look like when I take notes? And
What does it look like? We're getting real deep. This got real deep real quick. Okay, continue, please.
So I tend to do bullet points, okay, and bulleted lists and things like that. And I came across this app called Workflowy, which is an outline app, and it is basically infinite bullet points that are nested inside of each other. So you start with like a top level bullet point, and it could be something like conference notes, all right? And then you have a sub bullet that would be iTech, and then maybe one that was ISTE, and then maybe one that was FETC. And then under that bullet, you can have another bullet that would be like 2020, 2019, 2018. And then under that bullet, you can have the name of the sessions that you
like
go
the Matrix.
to.
Okay.
And it does get a bit like the Matrix. But once you get your head around that organizational structure of having bullet points that go into bullet points and bullet points, and it is all really easy to navigate once you set it up. It really just works the way my brain works for taking notes. So
That's a lot about you. So how do you search it? How do you go back and look through stuff? Does it have a really great search feature to it?
It does have a really good search feature, and you can also tag stuff. You can also star stuff. You can use it as to-do lists and check things off and do all kinds of other fun stuff.
Can you pull like a section of those out into its own, or is it just like one long bullet, like Jonathan Wylie's bullet points of life?
You can click on one individual bullet and just dial down to like that one session notes, and you can get like a URL link to share just that.
Really? That's
that little
interesting.
portion without sharing all the other stuff that's above it in the tree. So
all of the personal Jonathan Wylie thoughts.
Yeah. So there you go. Workflowy is my kind of secret weapon for taking notes on life. Lynn's nodding her head over there.
I'm just checking this out, and I definitely need to mess around just a little bit, but I'm a to-do list kind of girl as well.
Yes.
So there's check marks.
Do you get to like scribble it out? I really love to do that. Like the physical
I think
action
you will be sad that it does not allow you to do that, but it does have that satisfaction of like checking things off.
Nice.
So,
it has a strike-through feature for like completed, and it's available on every device, on the web, on mobile, everywhere, so you can just take notes on the go.
Good one.
There you go, Workflowy.
Yeah.
It is free-ish. You get like, I don't know, something like 500 bullets a month or something like that.
Oh my.
Which is quite a lot, I think.
I think
but
so.
if you
but when
want
you start
more,
tracking like how like bulleted your bullets begin nesting, that could be a lot.
Yeah, but there's a little part in your profile where you can click on and say how many bullets have I used this month, and it tells you. And,
Jeez, it's like an armory. Okay.
But it's only like maybe $40 a year or something if you want unlimited bullets, so it's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, robbing the bank here. Okay.
All right, so I think that rewinds up our first episode back from the summer. We weren't too rusty, I don't think.
No, I think we're all right.
Not too bad. I mean, but we had Lynn here to help.
You guys have been podcasting. I mean,
probably kept us on the rails.
There. Yeah,
we've been recording this summer, so, you know. Well, maybe we need Mindy as a surprise guest on Divergent by Design.
Yes. Crossover.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. All right, so until next time.
This has been the EdTech Takeout. We hope it hit the spot.
For more information on today's episode, please visit dlgwaea.org/podcast.